Well, thanks for joining us, folks, for yet another fun-filled 45 to 47 minutes of hopefully useful information. I'm Corey. I'm the guy that they nabbed to do all these things. And so without further ado, we will go ahead, jump in and get started. So again, did you just make sure your microphones are muted for me, please? And if not, one of the fine people on the line will mute you for me, which they thoroughly enjoy doing. So go ahead. So first off, if you're attending any one of the events over the next 2 days, we want to hear from you. So post something on social media. You may win something interesting, and some of you may win something uninteresting. But either way, we do want to hear from you. The appropriate channels are on the bottom of the screen via LinkedIn, via Twitter, or via Facebook. And we will randomly select a couple of winners and send you some prizes. So go ahead and do it. Take an interesting picture. By the way, the more interesting and creative the picture, the better your chances of winning. So show us something we haven't seen before, and we'll see if we can get something out to you. In terms of our format, if this is your first time joining us, a little quick review of the format and what we're going to go through. Sessions run today and tomorrow. They're all live. They will be recorded and available for download in the not too distant future. You can manage your agenda from workshop.learnondemand.net. Just like the sessions you want to add reminders, all those sorts of things. And then within there, check My Training or your calendar for the enrollments to the various sessions. Now, what's interesting about this is we run this entire program using our own LMS. If you're wondering how, feel free to ask, because you can use our LMS to do this stuff. And if you're one of our customers already, you have this whole tool set for free. So, feel free to check it out, and maybe it's something that works for you. Maybe it isn't, but definitely check it out. And if you want to know how, ask, and one of the fine people will walk you through how we do it. The agenda, the theme of this particular session, and I should say this entire event, is all around scored labs and performance-based testing. Now we'll dig into what that means, where it fits in, and how we're kind of dealing with it, as we go through here. But congratulations, you made it to the keynote. Following this keynote, we have a second keynote, which is all focused on best practices. Now, what we're going to try to do in this first session is give you some context around what scored labs are, what performance-based testing is, and how people are using it, and then how we're thinking about it in terms of capabilities, both within the platform and capabilities within our services team and our partners. The second keynote is David Alfassi from NetLogon. These guys are out there doing this stuff every day for some of the biggest testing and certification programs on the planet. So notes from the field, tales from the trenches, all the best practices that they've learned, having built and delivered thousands of performance-based testing items. He's going to go through in that second session. Following that, we've got a pretty good spread of topics from very technical on how we build this stuff over to some spotlights on what one of our customers are doing, CompTIA. So CompTIA recently announced that performance-based testing and scored labs is going to be part of their exam certification program. And so they're going to talk about what it is they're doing, how they're thinking about it, and how they're planning on being successful with that. Tomorrow, we've got another good slate of topics, all around, again, very technical stuff and how you build the actual scored labs and the content, over to how you decide if it's the right place to go and what the right approach is to do it. So 3 tracks, one for technical lab developers, one for operations managers, the folks that kind of schedule and manage this stuff, and then finally the folks that are deciding whether or not this makes sense. One of my favorite elements, and I've been known to kind of pop into these things randomly just to cause trouble, is our networking sessions. Our networking sessions are kind of open conversation topics that go on, where we bring a bunch of experts in, and it's just Q&A, it's brainstorming, it's just going back and forth on what works, what doesn't work. We want to hear from you. We'll tell you things that we don't normally tell you in some of these other sessions. So they're really good collaboration time. So think of these as, at the end of the day, sitting around the bar having a beer or a scotch or whatever you want to have. Well, we wouldn't have a scotch, we'd have good whiskey. But that's a whole other debate that we can have another time. Jenny, we should have a networking group on whiskey. That's what we need to do. All right, so with that being said, and actually, Jenny, we do need to have a networking group on whiskey and on ice, so we should schedule that next time around. That'd be fun. I'm now completely distracted. So Q1 2021, what have we been up to? A lot of things. Some of these things we're going to talk about as we go through the next 40 minutes or so. The first one is activity-based assessment outcomes. One of the topics that we're going to discuss as we talk about scored labs is the notion that scored labs can actually be dynamic. It's not a matter of you going in, creating a user, and us going, congratulations, you built a user. It's being much more creative than that. It's letting you go in, create a user, and depending on perhaps the way you created or the outcome of that user, giving you a second action. Perhaps maybe if we tell you to go create a database and you do it in 30 seconds, we go, you know what, you're pretty smart. Your next activity, your next task automatically gets harder, right? Or perhaps you struggle in deploying a website. Your next activity gets much more prescriptive and much easier. So this notion that you can dynamically change the flow of your lab based on how people perform as they complete the tasks in the lab. Code Labs V2. We launched Code Labs a couple of months ago. We've now released a second version of Code Labs, and we're currently working on Code Labs V3. So we'll talk about what that is and kind of where we're going with this as we go through, because this also ties into the notion of scoring and the notion of PBT. We can now use Windows Server Data Center Edition for all our lab profiles. We've got some new optimism, or should say, some new time-saving features. Having trouble speaking. A new selection of series save as. My God, who came up with that? So you can take a lab series and you can do a save as on it and replicate everything in that lab series. So maybe you've got two courses that are almost identical. You want to tweak just a couple of little things. There's some save as functionality, which it sounds like a trivial thing. It's actually quite a big deal. It was difficult to build, and it turns out this is something that folks are spending hours and hours and hours doing manually. And we found out about it and we're able to fix it. For those of you that use Azure, you can now have multi-subscription cloud slice. So what that means is I can deploy a single lab within Azure over multiple subscriptions, and within the lab have a user move data between subscriptions, for example, or manage subscriptions. There's a product called Azure Lighthouse that this ties very nicely into. You may have noticed in the last month or so that we've completely changed the way authentication works on our platforms. Prior to this, we had a fairly distributed authentication model where each component of our platform, our LMS, our customer portal, and the lab platform had individual user accounts. We've now centralized all our authentication systems. We've vastly increased the back-end security. We've tied into more authentication providers, so we have new options, and that one single unified account works across everything. And that's the model that we're going to use going forward, and it just gives customers additional flexibility. So we can now plug into, for example, different types of authentication providers that are maybe custom or proprietary to you. For example, you want us to use your in-house authentication provider, whatever that is. This new framework and this new authentication system that we put in place lets us plug into pretty much anything. We've rolled out some role-based recognition, right? So as you use various features in the platform, as you run classes, run courses, build labs, that now ties into Credly. You get issued badges for that. We've rolled out a new website, which I'm particularly excited about. I've been telling our marketing folks that our website has sucked for about 14 years now. Hey, good news, it no longer sucks. And so we've got a whole bunch of new information, new guidance that's coming out there. And kind of going back to this, this notion of lab series save as, if I can say it, I had mentioned that, this was something folks were spending, hours on. We found out about this because of our new user feedback platform. So LODS1/feedback, you can go there, you could submit ideas, you can vote on ideas, and you can, tell us what's giving you pain, so we can actually go in there and fix it for you. Read through what's giving other people pain, vote on it, right? Tell them, echo what they're saying, and if enough people indicate that something's an issue or there's a feature that's wanted, we'll go in and do it, right? And that lab series save as is one we didn't even know was an issue until our customers told us via this platform. And then finally, if you're in Lab on Demand or you're in the TMS, you may have noticed a whole series of pop-ups start to happen. We've now integrated into the platform inline training. So as you begin to work around, it intelligently tracks what you do and gives you tips and hints and guidance, right? The goal is to make it as easy to do things as we can. And so as you're working through creating lab profiles, creating classes, these little guides will start to pop up and help you get done quicker, help you make less mistakes. So a lot of really, really cool things that we've done in Q1, a lot of things that we'll talk about in 3 months that we've done in Q2 that we're working on right now. You'll get a kind of a preview of some of these as we go through, and you go through the different sessions over the next 2 days. So been busy, lots of really good stuff. So here's the feedback site. Again, the more you put in here, the better it's going to be for everybody, because we want to hear what's giving you pain. We want to know so we can fix it. This one actually is already done. I meant to fix this slide and I forgot. The in-app guide. So this is already in place. So as you can see here, as you open to create a new lab profile, it's just going to pop up right now. You know, do you know how to do this or not? And if you don't, we'll start to walk you through the process. So with that being said, let's jump into the meat of what we're here to talk about today, which is the importance of scored labs. So first of all, the whole notion of scored labs comes back to this concept that we've been talking about for a couple of years now, called challenge-centric learning. So let's start with a baseline of what that is. What is challenge-centric learning? It's a new instructional design methodology. Now, the key with this is it focuses on outcomes, not procedures. So instead of me telling you, you know, in order to create a database, click here, type this, click here, type this, I simply ask you to go create a database. I tell you what the resultant database has to look like, and I give you just enough guidance, tips, and hints that you're going to go in and figure it out for yourself. The intent is not to make it hard, but the intent is also not to do the work for you, to do the thinking for you. With challenge-centric learning, you have to think for yourself. You have to conduct some self-discovery. You have to explore. You have to do some trial and error. And science has shown that you will learn faster, you will retain more, and at the end of the day, it will be more effective. Now, there's other kind of interesting, you know, elements and facets of challenge learning. One of the biggest one is there's multiple paths to success, right? So let's say, for example, that I tell you to go create a database, and you're generally a UI person, you might go click the buttons. If you're not a UI person, you might go to the command line or to something like PowerShell and type a command to do it. In challenge-centric learning, we don't care how you got there. We only care that you got there. So it doesn't force the learner down a path that they're not familiar with. It takes the knowledge and skills they already have, forces them to go a little bit beyond their comfort zone, forces them to explore, to think for themselves, and then ultimately tells them whether or not they were successful. Now, another kind of interesting side effect of this, and there's 2 others I'll mention. One of them is that this is always at your own pace. So you cannot predict with any great degree of certainty how long someone's going to take to complete a challenge-centric learning activity. In the case of if I take a traditional hands-on lab, it's 6-7 pages of click and type instructions. I can pretty much predict, that's a 30-minute exercise. In the case of challenge-centric learning, it's very hard because people do this at their own pace. Some people will stop and will spend an hour reading and researching before they click the first button. Some people will just start pounding at the keyboard to see if they can find the combination that works, have that little aha moment, and move on. Now, what all this means is, because there's multiple paths, because you're not being incredibly prescriptive about what the procedures that people take, the maintenance and the creation cost of this style of learning is vastly lower. A document or a procedure that might take 10 pages to type out in traditional step-by-step type instructions, in a challenge-centric learning model might be done in a single page. And because that single page doesn't reference the user interface, doesn't reference the procedure, if the back-end systems that this is referencing actually change, it doesn't matter. And we've got evidence of this because with our Challenge Labs product that we'll kind of tie into a little later on, we've had labs that we've created in this model that have been in production for 2 years. And in those 2 years, the back-end systems like Azure and AWS have changed dramatically. And we have not once had to change those labs. So it was a one-time investment in creating the content, zero maintenance costs. Because the outcome didn't change, the measurement of the outcome didn't change, the procedure did, but who cares? Because we're not teaching to the procedure, we're teaching to the result. So what does this look like? Here's an example. I want to grab my guy right here. So on this first side over here, this is a more traditional lab model, right? Again, you can see it's very, very prescriptive. Go here, click here, go here, click here, type this, buy this. I just want to make sure. Look, is the screen share still out there?
Yep, it is. We can see your circle.
Okay, right. Okay, it flashed up like I lost it on my side for a second. Right, and then over here on the other side, we've got the challenge model, right? And the challenge model is, here's the task we want you to complete. Right, go do this task. And in this example here, you know, I'm showing you a little video clip of what this might look like, right? Now that's, you know, that's optional, obviously, but it's just showing you some of the different elements that can be incorporated in there. And then here on the bottom, we've got the different goals: assign users, create a group. But at no point is the procedure included. Instead, I include things like links to help you figure this out. Now, the question you may be asking yourself is, well, that's all great, but how do I know if someone is successful? We'll get to that here in just a couple of minutes. But again, to point out the writing style, right? The writing style is very, very, very different. The way you think about how you approach this is very, very, very different. So how does this play into performance-based testing? Because the whole theme of this is performance-based testing. Well, Scored Labs is the implementation method by which you achieve performance-based testing. PBT is validation by doing. So I get to a certification exam and I go, you know what? I don't want to ask you a series of multiple choice questions. I want you to go in and complete the activities. So the exam items become things like this right here. A series of tasks that you're told to complete. We don't care how you get there. We don't care how long it takes you to get there. We only care, do you achieve the result? So when we talk about performance-based testing, what you're doing is you're creating scored labs, and those scored labs become items in the certification exam or the assessment or whatever mechanism you choose to implement it. Performance-based testing is an industry standard term. It means I'm going to validate your skills by having you do something. And the way that we achieve that on this platform and with labs is by building scored labs. Now, is this important? Absolutely. This is becoming mainstream. 3 companies you see on the screen right now have made a public commitment that their certification programs are going to be focused on performance-based testing. Microsoft has been doing it for about 1.5 years now. And if you really look close, they've been experimenting with this for even longer than that. AWS has exams in beta right now. They made the announcement last fall. And CompTIA, we're going to hear from in one of the upcoming sessions as to what they're doing. Now, these are 3 I can tell you about. There are many, many, many more. We're working with somewhere on the order of 20 of our customers to build out some form of a scored lab solution that, you know, may be used for certification, may be used for low stakes skills assessment. The point being is that this is becoming mainstream now. Because this is becoming more mainstream, we've got to now begin to rethink how we approach training. And so to kind of talk about that for just a second, challenge-centric learning is an instructional design model. The result of a training program that focuses on challenge-centric learning is the certification program that contains PBT. So if you look at you know, the phase of a training program, these blue boxes represent the training side, right? Skills acquisition. The green boxes represent the skills validation or certification side. If you're going to have scored labs in a certification exam, right, which is a PBT exam. You have to have certification labs in your prep programs. Typically, the certification exam, is one style of scored lab. You're not going to give feedback. It's just going to be a series of tasks and nothing else, right? And the person taking the exam doesn't know how they do until the entire exam is scored. The certification exam might be entirely PBT. It might be a combination of PBT and multiple choice. It might be a combination of PBT, multiple choice, and other traditional exhibit type items. The sky's the limit on how you choose to put this together. What we see in many cases is exams that contain a mix of multiple choice and PBT items. It often takes time to spin up the lab environment. So you typically give the person some multiple choice, switch them into some PBT, maybe go back to some multiple choice, and those are the types of implementations we see as pretty common. Although we do have customers that have indicated that their certification exam programs will be exclusively PBT, no more multiple choice. If you have those in the exams, you now have to have them as part of the practice test too, where maybe you expose additional hints, tips, tricks, results, and even this notion of real-time scoring, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. That then has to permeate back into your training program, right? Where in your training program, whether it's before, during, or after, you no longer deal with procedure-based labs, you deal with challenge-centric scored labs, and you begin to transition your entire training program to this model. Even things as simple as your end of module review questions become challenge-based. The language begins to change. The way that you measure an outcome begins to change. And you begin folks thinking about this outcome-driven assessment result that's going to happen towards the end. So in order for this to be successful, and you'll hear this in a lot of the best practices, throughout the course of this event, you can't have a traditional training program and then have your exams PBT, because they're going to fail, because you haven't prepared the person through the entire training cycle for this way of thinking, this style of learning, this style of assessment. So it's particularly important that if you're going to make the investment in performance-based testing, at any stage, you begin to trickle that back through the entire training program. So that's to kind of lay the groundwork about what this is. So what are we doing, right? So Learn on Demand Systems as an organization, what are we doing on the technology side and on the services side to enable customers to do this stuff? Well, the first thing, and I think perhaps the most important thing, is we're actually doing this, right? This is not a hypothetical. This is not a future thing. We have been doing this now for a couple of years. We have 43 PBT-enabled exams, certification exams. I'm not going to tell you who they're with or what they're on, but there's 45 of them, and they span 13 different languages. So you can do this multilingual. You can have exams that are Japanese, that are Portuguese, whatever language you choose. We have 20 of our customers that are actively engaged in this in some way, shape, or form. Some are incredibly early stages, still scoping. Others have had exams in production for years now. We have full integrations with both Pearson and PSI. So in terms of, how do I have a traditional certification program or skills validation program. Can I just drop these new types of items in there? The answer is absolutely you can. And we've already done the integrations with the two biggest exam providers. And we don't have anything to announce today, but soon we will. We have additional integrations with both high stakes and low stakes assessment companies. And we have deep partnerships with service providers in this area like NetLogon that can help you get these things off the ground. Pearson and PSI are live today. We've got others that are going to be going live soon. So no matter how you want to deliver it, we can get that done. No matter how your software is deployed, AWS, Azure, Windows, Linux, or Docker, we have scoring engines for all of those, right? And then if you're not thinking about a platform, but you're thinking about the topic that you work on, infrastructure, which covers cloud, DevOps, data center, switches, hardware devices, networking, code, which covers language syntax like Java, Python, PHP, C#, etc. Data, which is big data, BI, SQL queries, even visualizations of data, and then security in terms of attack, defend, using tools like Kali Linux. We can score all those scenarios. Some are very easy, some are a little more complex, but we know how to add scoring into all these different topics. And then we've, with these 45 exams, hundreds of thousands, I'll say this right, of exams delivered globally today. And then you as a customer, you can do this all yourself if you want. So we have some of these customers where we're almost uninvolved. They're fully self-service, they do it all themselves. We have other customers that rely on us and some of our partners like NetLogon to build and manage these things for them. And then you don't need to go all the way to a certification program. Within our training management system, our LMS, you can tie this into badges through Credly. So if you're looking for more, to kind of dip your toes in a little more low stakes and rely on badges, we can do that via the integrations with Credly. So we've done a lot of this already, and this is a key strategic area for the company going forward. Expect a lot on the front of or in the area of scored labs as we begin to move into the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. This is something that's going to be utterly central and core to everything we do. It's not good enough to do it. It's only good enough if we can do it and score it well. So where else do we have scoring baked in? So right off the bat, if you've looked at our new template library, and if you haven't, you should. Our template library debuted last fall. We've got dozens and dozens of template labs pre-created, everything from data, code labs, cloud labs, data center labs. Every one of those comes with built-in guidance on how you add scoring to it. So you can take any one of these templates, you launch it, kind of work through the default manual that it gives you, and as you get towards the end, you'll be able to choose your deployment scenario, right? And one of the deployment scenarios that's included with all of our templates is how you score this template, right? And it'll walk you through the process of building new automated activities that let you begin to work with scoring. So all of our templates have this, it's built in, it's by default. If you're building labs not using your template library, I'll be honest, you're doing this the hard way. Without using the template library, 75 clicks. Using the template library, 4 to 5 clicks, you've got a lab up and running, ready to go. And not just a regular lab, a customized lab for you. And then you can leverage these template instructions to get you started in the scoring scenario. We had mentioned, earlier, PBT at the very far end of the spectrum is zero feedback. How do you begin to walk this model of challenge-centric learning back so that you're getting something that's more real time, right? And the answer is, one of the ways you can implement activity-based assessments or scored labs is using what we call real-time scoring. So what this does is this allows you to embed at any stage in the documentation or in the challenges, the ability to validate right down to a single step. So you can see in this particular example right here, you're given a troubleshooting challenge. And you're simply told, hey, look, this is, this is what you've got to do to complete the challenge, right? And this particular one right here, we've got a 3-step process. Number one, we're going to click this button here. Let me turn my pen back on real quick. We're going to click the button right. There we go. Click the button right here. That's actually going to break the environment, right? And that's also an interesting little scenario. By using activity-based assessments, which is the technical tool that powers scored labs, you can not only score environments, but you can actually inject commands into environments, including things like breaking it. You can have, for example, if you include randomization, a scenario where we often call our chaos monkey, which is I can click this button called Change Azure Configuration, but every time I click it, it does something different from a pool of 15 different ways it can break something. So you get to create these really interesting and dynamic environments where every time you run through it, it breaks in a different way, and it doesn't break in the same way for 2 people. So I break it. I then go through and say, you know what? We're going to verify it's not working, right? This is going to verify it's broken. And then this guy down here is the fun one. After I've gone in and fixed it, verify it's working. So I get to incorporate validation at every single step of the path. This could easily be 3 different things that are broken, and each button validates that individual thing. So as you work through, you get real-time feedback as to whether or not something's working. And then here's another method. You can have multiple checks all associated with a single button and provide individual feedback as to whether or not those checks are working. Right. So this is some of the materials. How you build this is some of the material that they're going to go through in some of the later sessions within this workshop. But you can be really creative here. You can have a whole series of things you have to do before you can advance. This is what's often called a gated scenario, right? I've got maybe 3 pages of instructions, and on page 1, I can't advance to page 2 until these checkboxes indicate we're good. Right? And again, just as creative as you want, as detailed as you want, or as vague as you want. But this is the notion of real-time scoring, and you can build this in the platform today. Another one that launched recently that we're particularly fond of, and I'm very interested in how people are going to use this. So we haven't begun to roll this out in our content libraries yet. We're going to fairly soon. We do have some customers that are beginning to play with it, which is the notion of outcomes. The whole idea of an outcome is as I work through a single lab, right? So I launch one lab right here, and I'm trying to get to the end of the lab over here. But the way that I get there can vary depending on the results of individual scoring items in the lab. And I can do lots of different things, right? So the two common scenarios that we talk about with customers are the first one is dynamic difficulty. If I'm unsuccessful with a challenge that says go deploy a web app, my next set of instructions are more detailed and more elaborate and essentially easier. If I'm successful deploying a web app, my next set of instructions maybe get a little bit harder. And we can do this as many different ways and as many different combinations as we want, all within a single lab session. So as I work through the lab, it gets harder or it gets easier. So that's one scenario. The second scenario that we've seen people begin to experiment with this is the idea of a dynamic path to an outcome. So for example, maybe this particular lab, what we want on the end, right, is we want to have a database deployed that's connected to some sort of website, right? It's a little happy website. But there's many ways I can get there. Maybe that database is on a virtual machine running SQL Server. Maybe it's a MySQL database running on Linux in a container. Maybe it's a web-hosted database natively on Azure or Amazon, right? I don't care. The outcome is, I can go to this web page and I can browse data. Well, you can allow the person to choose the path that they want to take and score them based on the path they choose. So, for example, these scenarios can get complex to design, but the outcomes are really interesting. So maybe the best possible outcome, because you have a requirement for a very high performance database, is something natively hosted on a cloud platform. But it's also not incorrect necessarily to do it in a container on a cloud platform. So you can present your challenge, and your first question can be, do you want to do this in a container or natively? Yes or no. And based on what they choose, they go to the next part of the lab. And the lab can dynamically diverge with all these different paths and eventually converge at the end with a functional outcome that you can score, and you can give different scores based on the path they choose to get there or the deployment model they choose. Some of the conversations we're having around this kind of an implementation is more around architecture and design versus pure administration. So you're going to make design choices, you're going to complete the implementation, and part of the scoring is the design choices you made as to whether or not they, most effectively meet the outcome or they only somewhat effectively meet the outcome. And I realize there's some ambiguity in that, but I want to give you some thoughts on how you begin to think about this new model. There's a lot of potential here, and there's some folks going to come up with some really creative ways of doing things. So I, for one, am looking forward to seeing what people do. Something that we've added recently, and really we haven't made a lot of noise about, is we now have, particularly for cloud-based scoring, a much more flexible scoring engine. So in the past, you chose PowerShell or Bash, and that was it. Now we have what we call our Cloud Script Execution Engine 2.0, or CSEE 2.0, a little internal name for it. What this does is it allows you to choose from any one of the supported languages we have in the platform, which are things like JavaScript, Python, C#, etc., and the version of that particular language. So in the case of PowerShell, you see in the top example, PowerShell 703 with the Azure commandlets 480. And what's really fun about this is when you choose the scoring language environment for your scoring script, it stays with that scoring script. So you can actually have within the same lab, or even within the same activity, different languages on different versions based on the very specific requirements that you have. They operate completely in isolation. And as we add new scoring languages, a new version of language, it doesn't impact anything you've already gotten created. So called Cloud Script Execution Engine 2.0. Again, additional levels of flexibility. Choose the language you like, whatever you're comfortable with, whatever's relevant to the platform. For example, JavaScript is very popular in the AWS world. In the Azure world, PowerShell, obviously. But within the Azure world, depending on the version of the commandlets, it can give you different commandlets or different functionality. So if you're scoring an older feature, you might need an older version of the commandlets to get the right kind of command. It also, again, reduces the maintenance because as they roll out new features, new commandlets that depreciate old ones, you don't got to worry about having to update your scoring scripts because we're going to preserve what it is that was included with the scoring environment. The newest one, and the one that we're going to be working really heavily on in coming months, is code scoring. So this is a whole new category of skills that is new to the platform. And we've only just had a few customers now begin to start experimenting with this. The idea behind this is if you're teaching language skills, syntax, programming structures, things like string concatenation, math, conditional looping, array management, fundamental programming concepts, not how to deploy a website, but how to write the code that eventually goes in the website. It's a very fast, very capable virtual coding environment. That's all it is. You just write the code. The code is packaged into functions. You can choose multiple languages. And the way that you validate the code works is by doing this, using this testing framework. And the testing framework is really quite simple. You predefine a series of tests, you call them whatever you want. You say, this is what I'm going to feed to the test. This is what the test is going to produce. And it will actually score it for you. And you can see down here that, of this particular example I ran, only one of the tests passed. So the idea behind this is I give someone who's learning code a challenge. Write me a piece of code that calculates a leap year. And in doing so, I'm testing your ability to use syntax. I'm testing your ability to use, whatever method you want. Maybe it's even something simpler like, here's a string. I want you to extract a middle name. And so you're testing, can they identify, where the first space is and the second space is, and so track those from the overall length and identify the piece of text in the middle and pull that out. And you give them a series of predefined, I'm going to feed it this name. This is what the expected output is. But then also give them the ability to define their own tests so they can validate their own code, right? In the case of a PBT item, right, a true performance-based testing item, you probably wouldn't see these built-in tests, right? Because we can actually choose in the editor, you can see over here to hide those. So, as the person completing the challenge, I don't know how it's going to be evaluated. I'm just going to use my custom tests, right? And in doing so, I'm not only testing their ability to use syntax, but I'm validating, can they think about it the right way? Can they account for all the different scenarios? And as you can see, this is, again, a multiple language setup. The 6 default languages are C, C#, Go, Java, PHP, and Python. We have plans of adding upwards of 40 different languages to this framework. We're also adding additional scoring capabilities, things like looking at error logs, things like looking for regular expression output in things of that nature. So this is an area that, right now is very capable. We've got customers that are using this today, but as we go into the future, a lot of work is going to go in here, and this is going to become an incredibly robust code scoring and code learning platform. So we're pretty excited about it. And then finally, if you're looking at all this and going, you know what, this is great, but I don't got time to build all this stuff. We have our Challenge Labs library, currently 600 challenges strong, plans to go to 1,400 this year. And you can see on the right-hand side some of the new topic areas that are going to become fairly predominant. Code, data, Kubernetes, security, VMware, artificial intelligence, Veeam, and Checkpoint are all being added to our library in the next couple of months. So if you want to begin to incorporate challenge-centric learning into your training program, this is a really great way to get started, because these are literally, look, act, and feel like both the performance-based testing exams and all these examples of different things I've shown you as we've gone through are all built into this Challenge Labs library. Multiple levels, very easy, very guided, up to things that look, act, and feel like a commercial PBT exam item. So great options that will help you get off the ground. And then finally, as you're looking through all this stuff, you go, you know what, that's great, but how do I build it myself? We've documented all this, and it's available. It's been available for a while. There's a blueprint that you can download. The blueprint is how we build hundreds of Challenge Labs every single quarter. How do we structure it? How do we design them? How do we score them? How do we, onboard the vendors and the authors? Everything that goes into the entire program. And then if you're looking at this and going, okay, but I still need to convince folks that challenge-centric learning is the way to go, we've got an ebook that talks about all the benefits of challenge-centric learning and how that fits into the larger education program. So two great things to take a look at to help you get started. So a lot of stuff. Hopefully we've set a good framework for the material that you're going to go through in the next 2 days. So with that, we'll kind of end with a couple of quick reminders. As you look to learn more, every week, feature demos, right? We pick something fun and exciting. We do a deep dive on it. Those happen every week, lods.1/overview to register and to look at the library of past recordings. Every month we have a lab developer workshop, okay? Next one's on April 29th, and you kind of take those overviews and you go in and do it yourself, right? So we have our lab developer staff on hand, some of our actual dev team on hand, our general experts, and you go in and get guided practice and help actually building this stuff out. So, we do practice what we preach with these lab developer workshops. And then finally, our quarterly launch events, which this one is, to kind of take a step back, look at some of the bigger picture stuff to help you think about what is coming up, what you need to think about, and some of the new trends in the industry. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. But I'd encourage everyone to complete the evaluations, join us on Slack. And then as you think about this and go through, just kind of a quick reminder, we can help you do all of this. We have a network of partners. Our premier partner is NetLogon. Whether it's low state, high state, badging, certifications, we have the people on staff that can do this for you. And we also have the partners that are experts in this that can come in and help you build things out. So feel free to reach out. And then finally, little preview of what's getting rolled out on Thursday, because I like teasing things a little bit. G2 badges, we got a new one this time around, which is for our support team. So we're going to be giving those guys a pat on the back. Real proud of our support staff. They've now 24/7, and this is all based on customer feedback. So you have issues, feel free to reach out to support. They rolled out some chatbots recently that folks are loving because it's real quick answers to common questions. That combined with the new inline training and help they put in the platforms, real proud of the work they've done. So we'll wrap it up there. I'll hang around in case there's any questions in the chat, or if you guys want to ask a question vocally, that's cool too. And with that, I thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of the content.